Welcome to the Straight Fire Podcast. Join hosts Landon, Noah, and Benjamin as they tackle challenging biblical truths with fresh perspectives and lively discussions. Ignite your faith with every episode. Subscribe now and never miss the fire.
Hello, everyone. We'd like to welcome you into the third edition of the Straight Fire Podcast, the third episode. What a wild time. We hope you enjoyed the first two. If you haven't listened to those, you should totally go check those out. There's some great content and great stuff on there. Today we have, again, another very prevalent topic, and I've simply titled it, All Right, Christians, Let's Talk About Phones. And I think the key verse I want to bring up here is what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 6:12. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. So the question we want to ask today is, can we say that we're really in control of our phones? These devices have become more and more essential today, and there's no getting around that. But the time that these things get, along with the privileges that we give them, are dangerous. Are we controlling our phones, or is it controlling us? Any thoughts about that as we bring it in?
Yeah, I think you see throughout all of history, you see throughout, especially now recently, and it's taken many forms, but when anything takes the place of God, it starts that person's life or that country's life or that culture's life, whatever it may be. When something takes the place of God, things start to crumble, right? Things start to completely fall apart. And if God is in the center of our life and function in our lives and we're serving him as we should, we're blessed and we see that. But once we allow something, and it can be so innocent that we don't even think about it, but once we allow something to take over that number one spot in our lives with our time, with our attention, whatever it may be, that's a big problem. And we see people struggling because they've allowed their phones or even whatever it may be to take over that number one position.
Yeah, speaking of that, taking over, listen to these stats. 93% of Americans have a smartphone. Almost 90% of the world's population has a smartphone. 98% of Gen Z has a smartphone. I'm honestly more surprised that there's 2% without a smartphone than there is 98% with one. The average person spends 4.8 hours a day on their phone. Honestly, that probably feels a little low. I would assume it's higher among the younger audiences.
Wait, what was that stat? 4.8?
4.8 hours.
I have 4.8 on social media alone.
Dang.
Yeah.
77% of teens spend 3.5 hours every day watching videos. So that doesn't even go to the total screen time. 71% of adults check their phones when they wake up. And then this is a stat that kind of hit home with me. 74% can't leave their phone without feeling uncomfortable. And that stat shows us how dependent we've become on these devices. I can't go for a walk. I can't go to the store without bringing my phone because I might miss something. And so I think what we have to look at for this podcast is what Paul talked about. These phones, they're not sinful to own. They're not unlawful to have. But I will not be brought under the power of anything. Are these devices tricking us into thinking that we're over them when they're really over us? And so I want to get y'all's opinions on how should we do anything? How should we do something? Should we rein these back at all? What are y'all's thoughts as we bring this in?
I think this is a very new topic. Phones have not been mainstream for a long time at all, especially phones of this potential, right? The potential, I can do on this device right here, I can do whatever I want to do.
He's pointing at his phone now.
Yeah, I'm pointing at my phone. For those of you not watching, I can do whatever I want to do on it. It's a small computer. What used to take people whole rooms can be done in my hand, yeah. Right? And so it's such a new issue that we have to be really careful with it because when you're reading those stats, we all kind of recoil a little bit, right? Well, that can't be me. And it gets us a little uncomfortable. And I think before we dive into this discussion, we have to be honest with ourselves about this, right? It's so important that we don't just instantly get defensive about it, because when you get defensive about it, you can kind of tell that maybe there really is something that you should look into. So we have to be comfortable and willing to talk about this and willing to make changes if we have to, even if it's hard, right? Because this is so new that we have to adapt to it very quickly, and we have to be very cautious about these devices.
Yeah, I would address this with an open mind,
Yes.
remembering that because this is so new, things can change very quickly. It's not like an issue of adultery, which is a very prevalent issue that needs to be taken very seriously. But the Bible's very clear when it comes to that. And we kind of look at phones and we're thinking, well, the Bible's a little on phones, but I'm looking at some of the verses I pulled up, and they're very can be very condescending on phones. And specifically, I think we talked about this a little before we started. What's on the phones? Social media, entertainment. Teens spend 3.5 hours every day watching videos. Like the phone in itself, of just the ability to call, text, and like look at the weather, that's one thing kind of completely by itself. It's these things that it's these apps of social media. It's TikTok. It's Instagram, it's YouTube, it's all of that stuff that can kind of make these things a little more iffy. And I'll be honest, like I make YouTube videos. I love making YouTube videos. I love watching YouTube videos. But it's how much time I'm giving these things. And it's what I'm giving these things control over that does worry me.
Yeah.
So let's look at the first question we have here. Unless Landon, Noah, y'all would like to add anything.
Oh, you're good. Go ahead.
All right. So how should we use these devices? And again, what we talked about, what should be on them? Would y'all like me to start with a verse that I found in Ephesians chapter
Yeah,
5?
go ahead. I was about to say something, but it was more funny than I was going to say the Bible app.
The Bible, yeah. The Bible app and
Yeah.
texting mom. Because I wouldn't be able to go anywhere without that. Like, imagine my phone without Life 360. Like, my parents would, they'd have to ride with me everywhere. But, like, that's a great app. I would put that on your phone. But, so, bringing it back, we have how to not use them specifically. And I feel like as we talk more about what should be on them, we're mainly going to focus on what to not put on them. But I found this verse in Ephesians, or verses in Ephesians chapter 5, and they opened my eyes a little bit. And it was, but among you there must not even be a hint of sexual immorality or any kind of impurity or of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. Pause. That makes sense, right? Sadly, these things that we're putting on our phones, this verse has already called out the things that we're putting on our phones, because these phones make it very accessible for us to get to this sexual morality, impurity, things like that. But then we continue on. Nor should there be any obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving. So now he's just bashed TikTok, and then he went to go bash Twitter. And so Paul is just on a hot streak right now,
He's just
bashing
taking
phones.
out social media.
Paul's
He's
just going
like-
off on social media. But, I think, again, like, it got really personal when Paul started talking about court. Because, like, think about, like, all the impure or, like, the like, weird jokes that you see, the things like, okay, you really shouldn't have said that. Like,
Right.
all that stuff that we see, people of power, like, putting things online that, like, should never even be said to, like, a close friend.
Right.
Like, the gossip, the slander that gets put out there, all of that is on our phones. And then Paul continues on by saying, for this you can be sure, no immoral, impure, or greedy person, such a person is an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because such things, God's wrath comes on them who are disobedient. Therefore, do not be partners with them.
And what verses were those?
Ephesians 5, chapter 3-7.
Thank you.
Yes. And so, like, Paul is really calling out what we have on our phones. Like, so when we're talking about what needs to get put on these things, nothing with sexual impurity or sexual immorality, nothing with any impurity. Like, let's focus on that for a second, because all people's phones are littered with this kind of stuff. Like, YouTube gives me direct access to this kind of thing. TikTok, direct access. I'm sorry, I'm kind of going on a tangent, but I see it all the time. People who are struggling with this because of these platforms.
Yeah, and it's a very big problem with how accessible everything is. And I like to think about this phone issue directly relating to how the Bible talks about money. Because the phone in itself is not sinful, just like money in itself is not sinful, but the love of money is sinful, right? And we see that. And like, phones are almost what you think of an unlimited resource. It's almost like having unlimited money at your fingertips. Like, you can do anything on this phone. Or like, if I have unlimited money, I can do anything with that money, right? And that's so it's a good way to think of it to get your mindset right. Like if I have unlimited money, I have to be very careful about what I spend that money on and how I use that money to bring myself enjoyment, because so easily it can take my attention away from what's important. This phone can so easily take my attention away from what's important and get me focused on things that don't really matter, that I don't need to be looking at, that I don't need to be listening to, and ultimately take me farther away from God.
Yeah. Landon, would you add anything to that?
I think we've already kind of covered it, but just to kind of bring it all together is, phones are not sinful, obviously, but there's more than one way that they can be. I mean, looking at my screen time or yours or whoever's watching, how much time have you spent on your phone and I'm talking to Christians, how much time have you spent on your phone in comparison to how much time have you been studying the Word of God? How much time have you been working for the Lord? And just for one day, because I'm not counting the hours that you're sleeping, let's just say 14 to 16 hours, how much of that was spent on your phone, on social media, on the TV, on the laptop, on YouTube, in comparison to how much time I spent in Bible study or talking about God or in some shape, form, or fashion? Where does that line up?
Let's use round numbers.
Let's just use round numbers.
If we spend 4 hours on social media every day, 3 hours watching videos every day, that's 7 of my 14 hours that I'm awake.
That's probably watching videos on social media, so go 5.
Okay.
Make it a little more bearable. Okay.
5, let's say 5 hours. That's 5 hours of being on social media and watching videos out of my 14 hours that I'm awake. That's more than a third of my day gone. Wasted.
And then when you add into it, I'm going to eat, I'm going to go places, I'm going to do things, that's going to knock out probably another 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what am I left with? I'm left with 2 hours.
2 to 4 hours left.
Yeah.
And then, we get in 15 minutes of Bible study a day.
Yeah.
And it really shows these phones can really show your value in things.
What if I issued a challenge? You don't even I could issue like the equal ratio of like for every hour of screen time you have to do an hour of Bible study. But what if I half that? For every hour of screen time you have to do half that time in Bible study, and it would still be incredibly hard to do. Like, this is Benjamin, we're talking to Benjamin. I don't think Benjamin can pull that off. Like, I don't know if Benjamin can take all of the screen time he has and then put that in Bible study. And one of the things I also worry about with phones is how incredibly dull they make everything else look as well. Like, it's hard to go scrolling through social media and then go read the Bible because of how because of the way our brains wire.
You don't enjoy the little things as much anymore.
And I mean, not even just that, just talking to friends, period. I mean, these people just sitting in the restaurant, I mean, whole families, they're just on their phones.
Yeah. Well, you've got dad, you got dad on a call. You've got mom watching
scrolling Pinterest.
Yeah, you got mom scrolling Pinterest. You got little John. You got like teenage Johnny. He's watching like TikTok, and then you got like little. Let's say they even have twins. Little Debbie and Denny. They're on an iPad. I'm just making up names right now, but they're on their iPad. They're on their iPad watching shows, and like you see that, and like you're like, man, that's incredibly sad. And then you pull out your phone to watch videos.
And in the same restaurant, you're on YouTube.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you're watching videos, and that picture just shows what a horrible state we're in when it comes to this, especially Christians.
And that's just bringing into perspective, how much time do I spend? Because Noah said at the beginning of this podcast, whatever you put first is going to come first.
Yeah.
And if I'm putting more time and more energy, when I wake up, what do I think about? Do I think about, I'm going to check my texts, I'm going to see if I got any notifications on Facebook, or do I think about, let's pray, let's talk to God for a little bit, let's study? What is on your mind? Because what's going to be on your mind when you wake up is what was on your mind when you went to bed the day before.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, think about it. It's a constant cycle. I believe God was telling, and I know I'm going to get blasted in the comments if I get this wrong, but God was telling Joshua, right? Meditate on the word morning and night. When you rise up in the morning, think about the word. When you go to bed at night, think about the word. And that, if you can do that, that topic is so applicable to us. If you can make the last thing and the first thing you do every day, because it's almost like bookends, right? If I can make the first thing I do about God and I can make the last thing I do about God, well, it looks like my whole day is going to be about God. But when the first thing I do in the morning is about my phone, and when the last thing I do in the night is about my phone, what was my whole day about? It wasn't about God.
And sadly, that's become, I feel like, wider into people's routine. I know it's become wider in mine. Like, wake up, check my phone. Like, I'll go to ESPN. Like, what's happening in sports? What's happening online? What's happening on this? Go to bed. I'm probably watching a live stream or a YouTube video and stuff like that. Like, it really is the bookends of our days. Yeah. How do we break that cycle?
And I hope people can see that like, as we're talking about this, we're not talking about this from this vantage point. Well, I'm so much better than you. Y'all get off your phones for like. We're talking about this after
Yeah.
living it, right? And I know this podcast and studying for it has really challenged me to change some of the time that I put in different things and change the order of things, how I do things, like the order of operations.
Yeah.
What's the first step? That's the most important step that makes sure everything lines up the way it's supposed to.
This is Benjamin talking to Benjamin here.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
Benjamin, you need to get this right. And
This is a very self-challenging podcast.
yes, it's a self-challenging episode and a self-challenging podcast. Love that plug there. So would Christians benefit more without phones?
See, I think
Okay, let me rephrase. If I walked up to Landon and I was like, Landon, I think these phones, or let's say Landon walks up to me,
give me your phone.
Landon, like, I think these phones are leading us down a road that's not good for us. I think we need to go back to flip phones.
Oh,
Would
you've
you
lost.
be-
You've lost half the world. They're out of Christianity. They're gone.
Well, no one's watching our
Would
podcast.
would you switch to a flip phone if you thought you would be better, you'd be better with it if you're worried about social media because again you're on a literal flip phone.
Sitting at this table, I want to say yes.
You want to, yeah. I thought the
Exactly.
same thing. It'd be so easy to say yes, but it's the weeks after. It's pulling it out in front of your friends and getting ridiculed.
And everybody being like, what is that?
It's
I mean,
those nights when you're sitting and you don't have anything to do and you want something to do, but you don't really want to do anything hard, so you just want to pull something out and let your brain have a break. It's those times where you really struggle. Yeah.
Right. And I know, I said, there's more than one way a phone can be sinful. And of course, your time. But let's just say, man, and what we're not saying is that you should always line up Bible time with the phone time. I'm not saying you should not either. I think that,
I think people have to make that evaluation for themselves.
but there's
be
another
honest.
way it can be sinful, and that's like, what do you have on it?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I agree.
I don't have social media on my phone. That's me. I have nothing.
Me neither. I mean,
Now, I am not saying that if you have Facebook, if you have whatever, that it's wrong. But I am saying that there are temptations that you are going to bring into your life when you get it, and you need to be ready for that.
yeah. And I know what the go-to excuse is. Well, I have the Bible on my phone. Yeah, but the Bible can also I can also put the Bible in a backpack. But also is on that phone. It's like, well, I don't spend a lot of time on my phone, but the 15 minutes I do have is spent watching horrible videos.
Yeah.
I don't spend a lot of time on my phone, but what I do have is used when I'm trying to avoid people I don't want to talk to. It's used at moments when it really shouldn't be used at all.
One of the passages that I want to go to, and obviously we're getting to a point where we're going to address this problem here in a minute, I'm sure. But
No.
to really to really show how, because I think we protect ourselves from the truth and we don't accept how bad these things really are for us. And because there's not really a Bible passage that says, hey, these things on your phone are really bad for you, don't do them. But there are the principles that apply. And one of the passages that I found, and when I was reading it, I was like, this sounds so much like social media, so much like influencers, so much like YouTube, so much like some of the YouTube videos that come up on my feed, that it was so applicable that I always think about this when we're talking about any sort of videos online, because these are the people on there that are glorified and praised. And in Second Peter 2, it's talking about false teachers and false prophets. But these sound so much like the people on all those social media platforms. And it's a bit of a longer reading, but I'm going to go ahead and read all of it. It's 2 Peter 2, 12 through 17, and we might not read the whole thing, but it says, but these, like natural brute beasts, made to be caught and destroyed, speak of the things they do not understand, and will utterly perish in their own corruption, and will receive the wages of unrighteousness, as those who count it pleasure to carouse in the daytime. They are spots and blemishes, carousing their own deceptions while they feast with you, having eyes full of adultery, and cannot cease from sin, enticing unstable souls. They have heart trained in covetous practices, and are accursed children. They have forsaken the right way, and have gone astray, following the way of Balaam the son of Beor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. But he was rebuked for his iniquity. A dumb donkey, speaking with a man's voice, restrained the madness of the prophet. They are wells without water, clouds carried by the tempest, for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever.
Yeah.
And I think that really puts in perspective this is what is on your phone. This is the potential of what is on your phone, who is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. And I think those words are used very specifically by the Holy Spirit to warn us, stay away from those people.
Yeah.
Because they entice unstable souls. They will lead you to this place of darkness. And as Christians, that's where we're all trying to avoid. That we're trying to stay as far away from there as possible. But this phone is they can directly contact me. That's how I come in direct contact with these people who will try to entice me and lead me away. Because they want they want me to follow them, right? Whether they admit it or not, they want me to follow them. And if my Christian beliefs are getting in the way of following them, are getting in the way of following social media or YouTube or TikTok or Facebook or whatever it may be, if my beliefs are getting in the way of that, they want me to get rid of those beliefs. And that's the people who we are dealing with, right? It's so important to keep that in perspective.
When we have a phone, we're so connected to everything.
Yes.
And I think we said that last podcast talking about mental health. I think we talked about how the phone really doesn't help us when it comes to things like mental health. And when we're so connected to, like you said, these people who are clouds blown everywhere by the wind and who are empty wells with nothing to gain, we're attaching ourselves to people who we don't need to be messing with. Like you said, like some of the people we see on these apps, you would never want to meet in real life. Like, they're horrible people who've done horrible things, and yet they're always they're always held up as an example on these apps because we can't see everything they do.
Yeah.
And so we have to be very careful what we endorse when we're on our phones and we're like, I'm taking 15 minutes off, and we relax ourselves, and you can never anyway, hold on, let me reset. And you can never relax with that phone in your pocket. There it was. It took a second to get there, but we did.
Yeah.
But we did.
I think we spent a long time bashing phones and bashing ourselves. We probably need to focus on the encouragement. We don't have a lot of time left. We probably need to focus on the encouragement aspect of this podcast. Vision, or Landon, if you had something to say, I know Vision has some stuff for us to turn to.
Oh yeah, you can go ahead and go to that.
So, actually, the next question was, how can phones be used against us? Because I was assuming we would want to bash on. I didn't think we'd bash on them this much. But if you want to bash on them a little more, I think you can go for it.
I mean, I think we've covered it pretty well. I think, especially this 2 Peter passage talked about it. How can they be used against us? People are looking to turn our beliefs, whether they admit it or not.
I want to do a quick thing, and then we can move on to how they are helpful, because they really are. There are so many ways that phones do help us. But going back to when he said, if getting the flip phone, it all comes down to, what are you willing to give for Jesus?
Yeah.
I can't make you do anything. I can tell you what works for me when it comes to my phone, but it's different for you. I'm not telling you I can't tell you which social media you should and shouldn't have, what apps you should and shouldn't have, how many hours a day you should spend on your phone, if any. We can't do that.
Yeah.
That's for you to decide. But if you realized, or if someone showed you, you shouldn't have this, you shouldn't be spending this much time, would you be willing to give it up? If you realized the pictures you were getting sent on Snapchat you shouldn't be giving, would you be willing to get rid of it?
Yeah.
If you realized the videos on TikTok were corrupting your mind, would you be willing to get rid of it? If you realized that having a phone was taking more time away from God than it should, and you don't have the self-control, are you willing to get rid of it? Let's be real. Are you?
Jesus says, if my hand causes me to sin, I will cast it off, and
I will cut it off and cast it far from me.
Right.
This is the same thing about the eye, and both of those are applicable to the phone.
Are we willing to do that with our phones?
What we're not saying is get rid of your phone.
Chuck it.
Chuck it.
Do not. Yeah,
that's not what we're saying.
I have heard of people who have had to, and I know that's not what we're saying now, but I have heard of people who cannot control their phone so much that they had to just end up smashing it with a hammer.
Yeah.
Right. That they eventually got to that point.
I remember a therapist talking about it, and he helps people with pornography, and this guy kept coming back again and again, and eventually had to say, we're just gonna have to go smash it.
What are you willing to do?
And they did. What are you willing to give?
I like to think of that song, "What is he worth to your soul?"
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. If I gain the whole world but lose my soul, profits me nothing.
And the phone basically puts the whole world in your hand.
It does.
It's easy to think about the world as just this broad term of like, well, the world doesn't really mean so much. But when I think about what is he worth to your soul, are you willing to gain the whole world? Are you willing to get rid of your phone to keep your soul? And sadly, it's a choice that everyone, I'm sure, if you walked up to 99% of people, not even Christians, 99% of people on the street, every one of them would say yes.
Yeah.
But do they believe that?
Because we've deceived ourselves because we think it's not that bad, but because we're so protective of our beliefs and phones.
So, oh, I'm sorry, Landon, go ahead.
Oh no,
Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left. What do we want to say that can encourage people, one, when using their phones, and two, if they still should, and three, what can we put on our phones to make them worth it?
It's kind of what we talked about at the beginning. Be honest with yourself about your phone, right? Like, hey, this is really hurting me, and I enjoy this. I take pleasure in doing this, but if it's doing me more harm than good, then I'm gonna have to get rid of it. And it's hard. Like we talked about those stats at the beginning. It's hard to accept sometimes that this is really hurting me because we really don't want to let go of those things, but we have to, right? I don't want to cut off my hand and cast it into the sea, but I also want to go to heaven with Jesus. And if something is holding me back from that, then I have to get rid of it. We have to be so careful about ignoring, well, that people spend 7 hours a day on their phone. That doesn't really apply to me. And we move on with our life.
I only spend 3 hours a day on
We
my phone.
have to, and I know I've been the same way when we're sitting in those sermons and it gets really close to home and we start deflecting, we start shielding ourselves like, no, that's not me. I do this. I don't do this.
Yeah.
And we don't take the message. Take the message, whether it's from us or from someone else. Don't let this cause a stumbling block in your life that will push you further away from heaven.
Yeah.
Because ultimately that's where we're striving to go towards. And in the moments where we're weak, and in the moments where we need help, and in the moments where we need to turn to something greater than ourselves, most people end up going to their phones to find comfort. They don't go to God. And that's where they need to be going.
You know, on top of being true to yourself, I mean, think about it. I spend too much time on my phone. I need to change it. Get accountability.
Yes.
Most people, a lot of teenagers, I spend too much time on YouTube. I'm not going to be able to stop that on my own.
Yeah.
If you have a parent that is willing to do that with you, have them set a time limit.
Yeah.
Set accountability for yourself because it's going to be hard to do it on your own. And maybe someday you will get to the point where you can do it on your own. But as a younger person, as a teenager, take the opportunity to have that accountability from your parents. Or maybe if you're older, find a friend that is willing to do that with you.
Yeah.
Find the accountability because it's there for whatever it is. Maybe it's too much spending too much time, or maybe it's you are doing something on your phone you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
Get the accountability because it's there.
Here's an idea for anybody listening. What if like for instance you get a friend or accountability partner. I'll just use like me and Landon as an example.
Right.
Like every week I text Landon a picture of that little screen time pop up I get. And Landon's goal is to help me bring it down to like 2 hours a day or an hour and a half a day, whatever amount we set. And like, you know, Landon's going to see if it goes up and Landon's going to see if it goes down. And again, that will help you. So when talking about things to put on our phone, it's really less about what's on it and it's more about who's around us and who's helping us with it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important. And again, we've talked about it depends on you. You know what you need to be doing and accept the help.
Yeah.
People want to help you, and other people struggle with this. You're obviously not alone.
Almost.
This is something you struggle with.
According to these stats, almost everyone
struggles with it, and people want to help you. Maybe you and your friend both struggle with this, and you need help. You can both go to someone and make it more encouraging. Find someone who will really help you, who can really help you stay accountable.
And make sure you find someone that you don't want to disappoint.
Yes.
Right.
I think that's so important. And then ultimately think about disappointing God, right? Think about letting him down. Think about, I'm letting this phone come in between Jesus' sacrifice for me.
Yeah.
I'm saying this phone is more important than that sacrifice.
You know, I was thinking like, you know, I never want to disappoint. Well, there's a few people, but one of them would be my grandfather.
Yes.
I would never want to disappoint him.
Yeah.
He's a great example. Like, if it's Noah, like Noah's great, and Noah will hold me accountable. But I don't worry so much about like disappointing Noah. Yeah, because like honestly,
because he does it all the time.
I've disappointed Noah my whole life, apparently. But that being said, yeah, hopefully as a joke. That being said,
I wasn't joking.
That being said, I think when we're talking about phones, sum this up. Number one, focus on God. Always. I think that's going to be the theme of literally every podcast we do. Focus on God. When you have these devices, remember there's more to these devices than just what you're seeing on the screen. Secondly, put people around you who are accountable.
Yeah.
Right? There's horrible things on these phones that, like we talked about before, are trying to pull us away. Make sure you have someone that can keep you accountable.
And then the two of those things, again, like we've talked about multiple, you have to have both of those things, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to
Right.
acknowledge that there is a problem.
Remember what Paul said. Anything, like, if there should be nothing among you that is sexually immoral or impure. There should not even be a hint of it.
And going back to the mental health podcast really quickly, think about all those people whose lives are crumbling around them, who feel like they have no hope, who feel so hopeless because God is not in the right spot, like we talked about at the very beginning. They've let something else, they've let phones, whatever it may be, take over their life. And when that takes over your life, it's not a solid foundation, right? You don't have anything to hope for. And eventually, when the waves come and the storms come, if you try to if you've built your foundation on this phone, on this device, we all know the song, Splat, right? It has no chance. So if our foundation is built on God and we honestly hold ourselves accountable and get others to help us hold us accountable, and get God to hold us accountable through his word, then we will have that foundation that we can get through anything.
Yeah. Landon, anything you would like to say before we close?
I think we covered it really well. I mean, I can't remember where it's at, but it says, whatever you do, word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord.
Yeah. And
that doesn't just include your phone.
Yeah.
I mean,
everything.
Would you be ashamed for Jesus to get on your phone? Would you be ashamed?
Yeah.
Right.
And like, if Jesus was sitting next to me, would I be watching what I'm watching right now?
Would I have to tilt my phone a little bit?
If Jesus was in the car with me, would I be listening to what I'm listening to? Stuff like that.
I remember, me and Noah talked about when our little brother was born, we couldn't do the stuff that we used to do because he was always watching. There's another pair of eyes. And it still feels that same way. Like, there will be times when, like, I'm watching a video and, like, he's watching it with me, and it's like, I don't know if he should be watching this. And then you realize, well, if he shouldn't watch it,
I shouldn't be either.
Should I watch it?
Yeah.
And so that's something you need to keep in mind. And again, I would love to talk about this more, but that is all the time we have for this episode. We would like to thank all of you so much for watching. We really hope this podcast was helpful to you. And again, if you have any problems with this or anything else, do not hesitate to reach out. Also, we would like to do eventually in the future a Q&A episode. If you have any questions, go ahead, comment those where we can see them. I'll recycle them, or recycle them,
or get them directly to us.
Yeah, you can literally hand me a piece of paper. I'll hold on to them. I would love to bring them up, and we would love to answer those. We can't promise that we'll always have the right answer, but with God's word, I have no doubt someone will be able to help you. With that, we'd like to thank all of y'all for listening. We hope you have a great day. Again, just remember, keep God first in your lives. Love y'all so much, and thanks for listening.
Ignite your faith with every episode. Subscribe now and never miss the fire.